To another scary development on the Solomon Islands. That's within range of any Chinese missile that China gets to put on the Solomon Islands, and that may well happen. And where is the Albanese government now? Now, before the last election, before it, the Solomon Islands Prime Minister, Manasseh Sogavare, who's an authoritarian, very anti-Australian, very pro-China, signed a secret defence deal with that dictatorship. Now, that deal looked like paving the way for China to build a base on these very strategic islands. They dominate one of our key shipping lanes. And Labor back then attacked the Morrison Liberal government for being asleep at the wheel.
This is a very serious foreign policy failure.
And then, as the new Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, in one of his first foreign trips, made a big show of flying over there and being mates with Sogavare, turned down all criticism of him, put it all on mute, even when Sogavare postponed elections, hello. And journalists, by the way, particularly ABC ones, they stopped worrying about the Solomons. It's like, Albo is he's saved it, he's solved the whole thing. Well, big mistake. For instance, Sogavare has just gone to China to sign another security deal, this time letting China train his police that Australia funds. Other parts of the deal are secret, God knows what's in that. And Sogavare even called China his home, and he called its dictator, Xi Jinping, a great and wise man.
Much like I said, when I arrived and was welcomed, and I said, it's good to be back home. And that's what we admire, the leadership of President Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party.
And now, even worse, Sogavare has just landed back in the Solomon Islands and last night blasted Australia, calling it unneighbourly, lacking respect for the Solomons. In China, he also criticised our nuclear subs deal. He said China had to step in and help the Solomons when Australia supposedly failed to give the islands some of the $40 million a year we had promised. That turns out to be false. We had paid up, actually. But still not a squeak from Albanese about this. Now, joining me is Zed Seselja, who was the Morrison government's Minister for International Development in the Pacific, dealing with Sogavare. Zed Seselja, great to see you again. Look, Labor attacked you personally when the Prime Minister of the Solomons signed a security deal with China under your watch. He called you a junior. I won't go into the rest of it. Very insulting. Suggests you were out of your depth. Said the Morrison government, they were asleep at the wheel. But what a funny double standard, because right now, this same Labor Party, the government, is saying nothing at all now that Sogavare has signed another security deal with the dictatorship under their watch. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells me a couple of things, Andrew. One is that certainly Sogavare is a fairly volatile, fairly difficult character. He's someone who in the past has expressed a lot of hostility towards Australia, and that hasn't changed with the change of government. And I think what it tells us is that, a hug or a couple of meetings isn't going to necessarily change what is a very challenging relationship and what is a very difficult dynamic. I think the other thing, Andrew, that these circumstances tell us is that I think that the position that the Labor Party took in opposition in politicising this issue, but really, instead of blaming the Sogavare government for a decision that was against Australia's interests, they chose to, of course, blame their political opponents in Australia. And so what that has done, I think, is embolden Sogavare, because he has seen that he can make a decision that goes against the interests of Australia, his closest friend and neighbour, and there are no consequences. In fact, the political party who he's now dealing with in government blamed their opposite numbers. And so he's learnt from that, and he realises he can keep going down that path. And that's what he appears to be doing in some of his recent announcements about China, and indeed in his criticisms of the current Australian government.